Minari is one of the latest films from A24. Written and directed by Lee Issac Chung, the film is loosely based off memories from his own childhood and premiered at the Sundance Film Festival a little over a year ago and has just recently become available to rent on VOD. Minari stars Steven Yeun as the patriarch of a Korean-American family in the 1980s that leaves their humble life in California to pursue their own definition of the American dream. Chung's film fires on all cylinders in terms of its technical aspects. Every single performance, whether the actor is young or old, experienced or new, is simply phenomenal. Steven Yeun, since getting killed off of The Walking Dead, has seen his career gain steady momentum with standout roles in movies such as Burning and Sorry to Bother You, but after his role in Minari, it wouldn't be surprising to see his stock really continue to soar. Minari's score and direction is also wonderful, and the cinematography is terrific all around, and in some parts has a dreamlike quality that really nails the feeling of Minari being a series of vivid childhood memories. In their backstory, Yeun's Jacob and his wife Monica worked as chicken sexers in California, and continue to do so in their new home in Arkansas, while Jacob begins planting traditional Korean produce in hopes of cultivating a profitable farm. The plot of land that Jacob purchases to raise his family and his farm on was barren to the point where the previous owner committed suicide. Needless to say, this creates an ominous omen that hangs over the Yi family for the rest of the film. The implication of these omens are amplified by the primary conflict, the conflict between Jacob's ambition and Monica's desire for her family's security. Jacob is driven by his firm belief that a better life is just around the corner for his family, and he can only carve it out if he works hard enough. Hard to the point where he begins to lose touch with the family he's working to provide for in the first place. Monica is skeptical. The prospect of a new life is appealing, but she's mortified by the home they move into and feels unbalanced by the lack of certainty and the turbulence Jacob's ambition has injected into their once stable but unfulfilling lives. Before coming to America, the two promise that they will save each other, yet the slice of America they are served slowly dissolves their dreams. In the family's dark night of the soul, the underlying pride in Jacob's desire blinds him and pulls him towards the profit from the farm over his family. And Monica, bearing the future of her children's heaviest in mind, closes in on her decision to leave Jacob and take her kids back to California. Despite the conflict between Jacob and Monica being perhaps the strongest conflict with the greatest stakes in the story, the protagonist of Minari is arguably David, Jacob's younger son, played brilliantly and authentically by Alan Kim in his acting debut. After all, it's through David's eavesdropping eyes and ears that we are first introduced to the parents' conflict, and his sister's well-being is the motivating force for both parents. David and his gravely serious heart condition is one of the biggest factors that keeps Monica unsettled in her new Arkansas life, as the nearest hospital was a long driving distance away. Seeing the film through David's eyes is very interesting, as his upbringing is placed at a unique intersection, growing up between two differing cultures. Minari provided a refreshing take on the subtext of this kind of culture clash, as the Yi family, although subject to some curious looks and ignorant questionings, are generally accepted by their Arkansas neighbors. Instead of an external conflict on the cultural front, the conflict for David is internal. Despite Korean being the primary language spoken in the household, both the Yi children speak English fluently and guzzle down Mountain Dew for breakfast in the morning. It isn't until Monica's mother comes to live with the family that the fires of their Korean culture are stoked. David's grandmother, besides being one of the best grandmother characters in recent memory, brings with her many things from the old country, including a foul-tasting herbal supplement that David is forced to drink every day, and the Minari seeds. David immediately fosters a resentment towards his grandmother because of their lack of cultural cohesion, and because she breaks the conventions of the grandmother image David's predominant culture presents. She doesn't cook, she doesn't bake cookies, she swears, and she wears men's underwear. David's grandmother is a unique individual, but to David, she's not a real grandmother. Yet, her unorthodox spirit eventually becomes the foundation for the bond the two of them build together. She teaches David how to play her favorite card game, bandages his wounds, and consoles him when he's worried about dying from his heart condition. When David is worried and weakened by the thoughts of his condition, it is his grandmother who gives him the confidence to be a normal kid. While one of the first things we hear from David's father is "don't run," his grandmother encourages him to run. And at the end of the film, when his grandmother is disoriented and straying far away into the unknown, it is David who runs to bring her back. One side character in the film that struck an interesting counterbalance to the ease and the children's culture clash is Paul. Paul was a veteran of the Korean War, and despite being born and raised in Arkansas, he's an outsider of sorts to the local community. While most everybody in said community was religious, Paul took his faith to a zealous level, regularly speaking in tongues and carrying a cross down the road every Sunday. In one particular scene, David and his sister ride the church bus home, and the kids behind them tease and ridicule the cross-bearing Paul. In my personal interpretation, Paul's character could represent the alienation faced by some immigrants when integrating into a new culture, or caught in a cultural friction, like the Yi children. Paul was technically part of the community, but his lack of conformity to the societal norms created a rift. For the most part, this aspect of the film is left on a subtextual and interpretable level, but that sense of alienation could have been the inciting cause of the initial strife between David and his grandmother, as he may have saw her eccentric attitude as a threat to his assimilation. Jacob himself was desperate to assimilate into the prosperous ideal of the American dream. He stays close to his roots with respect to being stubborn about only growing Korean fruits and vegetables. But instead of being out of a reverence for his culture, this stubbornness may have been just an extension of his pride. Growing Korean produce in America's heartland was a way to cater to the American notion of individualism, and as he admits to his daughter, with the steady influx of Korean immigrants, he believed there was a growing market for Korean produce, a market he could pounce on and make a solid buck off of. The one vegetable he didn't pay much mind to was the Minari planted by the grandmother by the creek bed. Jacob endures many setbacks, but he perseveres and ultimately reaches a deal with a Korean vendor, but it does come with an ultimatum from Monica. Jacob does have a hard time choosing between his ambition and his family, as we see in the scene where he barges into the doctor's office carrying the crate of vegetables against Monica's wishes. Another possible interpretation of the Paul character is as foreshadowing for the kind of lonely life Jacob could lead if he chose the farm over Monica and his family. As the family returns home to the farm, the grandmother accidentally has set fire to the warehouse storing the fruit of Jacob's labor and sends it up in smoke. Jacob and Monica both storm in to save as much of the produce as possible, but as they get lost in the smoke, they make good on their promise and save each other from the flames. In a wholesomely ironic twist, the grandmother's act of accidental destruction is what united the family and brought them back together. In the final scene, we see Jacob and David marvel over the bountiful Minari by the creek bed. It's a scene that leaves us with a hopeful note, as it symbolizes a prosperous future, but also shows a reconnection between the Americanized Yi family and their Korean roots. All in all, I thought Minari was a fantastic film. Some people may take issue with the film's slow pacing, but I think if you were to give up on it at any point, you'd be at risk of missing a truly unique, incredibly funny, and heartwarming film.